Hi, I'm Jennifer Douglas, and I'd like to talk about sore throats and strep throat from the German New Medicine perspective. If you are brand new to German New Medicine, I would recommend going to my longer video that's in this playlist to get an overview of the GNM foundations so that you have a better understanding. Remember that in GNM, when we're talking about symptoms, what we're talking about is a meaningful tissue adaptation that is occurring in response to an acutely distressing event in our life that sets off a meaningful biological program that affects a part of our brain, a brain relay, and a corresponding organ in our body. In that program, there are two distinct phases. So we have this acutely distressing event that catches us off guard and is isolating in the moment. And when that happens, depending on how our subconscious interprets it, it will then set off this meaningful adaptation that affects a part of our brain and a tissue in our body. In the case of the throat and pharynx, what we're talking about here is a flavor of distressing event that is generally in the same category as the outer layer of our skin and other tissues in our body, like the lining of ducts, the lining of our bile ducts, lining of our milk ducts if we have them, the lining of the urinary tract. This is all the same type of tissue. And this type of tissue has to do with social connection, and the general theme is a separation conflict. So being separated from someone or something that we really want to be close to, or the opposite, being forced to be close to someone or something that we really don't want to be close to, or we wish we could be separated from. And in the case of the throat, there's a particular nuance of separation conflict here, and we describe it as a don't want to swallow conflict. So you can think of this as a situation or an event that comes up that you just don't want to swallow. And we say that in our conversation, like, I just can't swallow that, I don't want to swallow that, that doesn't want to go down. What we're talking about here is something that we really just don't want to swallow. And so we have this two-phase process that happens when we experience a conflict where we don't want to swallow something, and that's how our subconscious interprets it. In the active conflict phase, while we're actively feeling that situation or event, we have cell loss or cell ulceration in the throat and pharynx area. And there's a meaningful biological purpose here, and that purpose is to widen the throat so that physically we could swallow that thing, that morsel that we didn't feel like we could swallow. So this is a primal biological purpose based on being able to swallow the thing that we don't want to swallow. Once we have reached a resolution, either that situation changes or we come to peace about the situation, then we go into a restoration or a healing phase, and that's where we typically get the sore throat symptoms, because then that tissue that was lost is being restored. So when we have that restoration, we get inflammation, we get pain, we get swelling, we get redness, we might have a fever. And if that conflict was particularly intense or of a longer duration, then the depth of the cell ulceration that took place will require bacteria in order to restore or replenish those cells. And that's where we get something that we would call a bacterial throat infection or a strep throat, because that is bacteria that is coming in during the healing phase as part of the restoration to help us to restore the tissue that was lost. So we see those symptoms and even the bacterial part as actually a sign that our body has already resolved something in that don't want to swallow area, and it is restoring the tissue and healing. So that can help us understand what's going on better. I'll go to a situation in my life where I had several sore throats in a row and talk about what was going on there. So this was a very long time ago when I was in graduate school, which was already a pretty isolating time in some ways. I might have been kind of primed to feel this kind of separation conflict because I already felt like I was doing a lot of things by myself with my individual work. And within a short period of time, the two people that I hung out with the most, who are really my best friends at that moment, both got jobs, and they both moved away quite suddenly, like within a few weeks of each other. And I think that that was probably the acutely distressing event that my subconscious interpreted as, don't want to swallow this. And it was a separation event because those two friends who I'd been really close to both left the area and were no longer there, so I couldn't hang out with them anymore. And what happened was I got a really sore throat after a while. So I was in this active conflict state, and then I started to feel better emotionally. I started to kind of get over the initial loss. And then I got this really sore throat that had the white spots on it. So it was definitely had some bacterial activity coming in, which means I had resolved this conflict of don't want to swallow, and my body was starting to go through the healing process. Had the fever, had the sore throat, and at the time I was like, oh no, I have a strep throat. And I went into the doctor and they said, well, it looks like a strep throat. We're going to give you a day or two of antibiotics and we're going to swab it and we'll send it away. So what happened was I took that day or two of antibiotics, the symptoms started to clear up, and they sent this test away and it came back negative for the specific strep strain that they were testing for. So in GNM terms, what was happening there was I took the antibiotic, which was killing off this bacteria, which was part of the healing process. So I did feel better from the symptoms. But then what happened was, because I didn't have the full round of antibiotics and my body was kind of partway through this healing phase, within about a week or two, the same exact sore throat came back with the same white spots on my throat. And so not knowing what else to do, I went right back again and said, look, the symptoms came back. And they did the same thing again. They gave me a day or so of antibiotics. They swabbed my throat. They sent it away. And they came back and said, well, it's not the strep we were culturing for, so we're not going to give you any more antibiotics. So what was happening in GNM terms there was, by taking the antibiotics, I was getting rid of some of that bacteria, which essentially took me out of the healing phase and put me back into a simulated conflict active for a little bit. My body hadn't finished out that healing process. And so over the course of about 2 months, I went through this same cycle 3 or 4 times where I got the sore throat, I got the fever, had the white spots on my throat, and because whatever bacteria was active in that wasn't the specific strep bacteria they were testing for, they would only give me like a day of antibiotics and then not anymore. And so my healing process kind of kept going back and forth between, the bacteria not being active anymore, and then it would kind of send me back into a conflict active state, simulated because of the antibiotic. And then once that wore off, the bacteria were not actually done with the healing process, they would come right back. Eventually, I did finish out the process after about 3 or 4 times of this kind of taking very small doses of the antibiotics, and I was able to complete the healing process. So this is not medical advice about whether to take antibiotics, but more the idea that when we get the sore throat, it has to do with this don't want to swallow conflict. And the more intense and severe that conflict, the more likely we are to have bacteria in the healing phase, which makes it a much more intense kind of sore throat with a higher fever and more discomfort involved. And that it can kind of recycle and come back if the conflict itself gets reinitiated, either because we are thinking about it, we kind of are reminded of it, it starts it over again, or the body isn't finishing out that healing phase and actually moving through the whole process. So I hope you found this interesting from the GNM perspective. And the next time you get a sore throat, think about, what did I not want to swallow before this, and what then resolved that allowed these symptoms to come forward in the healing phase?